Picture this: a cold, damp dungeon, stone walls dripping with water, the smell of sweat, rot, and something worse: fear. A man, bound tightly with ropes, lies on the ground. He struggles, but the ropes cut into his skin. A clay pot is placed on his bare stomach, its opening sealed against his flesh. Inside the pot, a rat scratches, squeals, claws. At first it tries to escape, circling frantically. Then, as heated coals are placed on top of the pot, the animal panics. It looks for a way out. And the only way out is down, into the man's body. This is not fiction. It is one of the most disturbing punishments ever recorded in history. Rat torture. Used in different cultures across centuries, it wasn't just about killing. It was about breaking the human spirit, showing victims that death wasn't immediate, but dragged out in terror. We think of torture as whips, chains, and executions in public squares. But this was something different. It turned a common animal into a weapon. An ordinary rat became the executioner. And unlike an axe, unlike a noose, it worked slowly, too slowly for mercy. Before we continue deeper into this chilling story, I want to pause for a moment. If you're fascinated by the hidden truths of history, the brutal side that official chronicles often ignore, make sure to subscribe. It helps us bring you more stories that history tried to bury. And let me know in the comments below, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Now back to the dungeon. Rat torture wasn't just about cruelty, it was about power. Rulers used it to silence enemies, to frighten entire populations. Criminals, rebels, and even political prisoners were subjected to it. The victims' screams weren't just for themselves, they were warnings to everyone else. And what makes it even worse is that the details survive not only in rumor, but in documented accounts. The Spanish Inquisition, Dutch traders in the East Indies, even regimes in Latin America centuries later, all are tied to versions of this method. Think of it. The rat, an animal humanity despised for spreading plague and filth, became an instrument of state terror. No blade needed, no poison, just time, heat, and hunger. The perfect cruelty. What you are about to hear in the next sections is not easy, but it is real. From medieval Europe to the torture chambers of Asia, from prisons in South America to whispered stories of empire, the rat became more than vermin. It became fear itself. Rat torture didn't appear overnight. Its roots lie in the way humans have always feared rats. Since antiquity, these creatures symbolized disease, decay, and death. The Black Death of the 14th century killed millions across Europe, and rats became forever linked with suffering. But long before the plague, ancient texts from Rome and China already spoke of rats gnawing at prisoners in dark cells. In Europe, the method gained infamy during the Middle Ages. Chroniclers describe soldiers capturing rebels, stripping them half naked and tying them down. Rats, trapped in barrels, baskets, or clay pots, were placed against the victim's body. Heat forced the animals to burrow, chewing through flesh to escape. It was simple, brutal, and effective. The Spanish Inquisition is one of the most notorious examples. Here, torture was designed not only to punish, but to extract confessions. Rats were ideal for this purpose. Imagine being accused of heresy, denied a trial, and thrown into a cell where the next sound you hear is the scratching of claws against your skin. Fear often made victims confess long before the rats touched them. The imagination did half the work. But Europe wasn't alone. In Asia, particularly in China, rats were sometimes used in judicial torture. Records mention rat cages, where the animals were set upon restrained prisoners. In Latin America, centuries later, Dictators and warlords revived the practice, proving its horrifying efficiency across cultures and time. What unites these stories is not just cruelty, but symbolism. Rats represented filth. To be consumed by them was to be dragged into humiliation worse than death. For rulers, it sent a message: resist us, and you will not die like a soldier. You will die like prey. Archaeological evidence adds weight. At old prison sites, small cages and iron pots with scratch marks have been found, suggesting they weren't just written legends, but chilling realities. By the 17th century, European explorers carried tales of this punishment to distant lands. Dutch traders in Indonesia spoke of using rats against rebels, while English pamphlets horrified readers with descriptions of burrowing beasts in Spain's prisons. The punishment became infamous, spoken of with disgust, but also with a dark fascination. Because unlike the executioner's sword, which ended life in a single stroke, this method dragged death out slowly, turning hours into an eternity. Victims weren't just killed, they were broken. The mechanics of rat torture were terrifyingly simple. A victim was restrained, usually on their back, unable to move. The executioner placed a cage, pot, or metal container filled with live rats against the victim's bare flesh, most often the stomach or chest. The opening of the container was sealed to the skin, leaving only one escape route: inward. To drive the rats, heat was applied. Sometimes glowing coals were placed on top. Other times, torches were held near the cage. As the temperature rose, the panicked animals did what nature compelled them to do. They searched desperately for a way out. When every other exit was blocked, they turned to the victim's body. Teeth and claws tore into skin, digging tunnels of agony. Survivors' accounts are rare. Most did not live long enough to tell their tale. But confessions recorded during inquisitions describe the anticipation as worse than the pain itself. Victims screamed not only from wounds, but from the thought of being eaten alive. Executioners perfected the process. They knew exactly how much heat to apply to prolong suffering. Too much, and the rats died. Too little, and they refused to move. The skill lay in balance, slow, steady pressure that forced the animals deeper and deeper. In some variations, rats weren't encouraged to dig inward, but to bite the victim's extremities, devouring fingers, ears, or even eyes. Shackled prisoners watched helplessly as their own bodies became a feast. But perhaps the most terrifying detail is this: sometimes the rats were not even hungry. They acted from fear. The heat drove them mad, and in their panic they clawed at anything in front of them. The victim wasn't just food. They were a barrier, torn apart because they stood in the way. This method could last hours, in some cases, days. Victims died of shock, infection, or blood loss. Others lingered, broken beyond recognition. Their screams became part of the theater of punishment, echoing through prison halls, meant to terrify those still waiting their turn. It was not only about cruelty, it was about control. Rat torture showed that rulers could weaponize even vermin, that no one, not even the smallest, dirtiest animal, was beneath being used as a tool of empire. Throughout history, whispers of rat torture appeared in courts, prisons, and wars. Some accounts may be exaggerated, but enough evidence survives to suggest the practice was real. In 17th century Holland, political enemies of the state were rumored to have been silenced with rats. A chronicler mentions a man named Peter suffering the gnawing punishment, though official records never admit it. The silence itself is telling. Governments often hid the most brutal methods to avoid scandal. In Spain, Confessions extracted under rat torture shocked even hardened inquisitors. Rumors spread quickly, and soon Europe's pamphlets portrayed Spain as a land of unimaginable cruelty. Whether every detail was true or not, the fear worked. The image of rats burrowing into flesh became a metaphor for tyranny. Centuries later, under South American dictatorships, prisoners whispered of la rata, a torture in which rodents were forced into victims' bodies using tubes. Survivors testified after regimes fell, their words chillingly similar to medieval descriptions. The method never disappeared, it evolved. Even literature captured the horror. George Orwell in 1984 described rats as the ultimate fear, inspired by these historical practices. In Room 101, the threat of rats was not about killing, but about breaking the human mind. Orwell knew what history had long recorded. Rats could destroy not just bodies, but souls. Perhaps the most infamous rumor comes from England's Tower of London. Stories claim prisoners feared the pit and the rats, where captives were left in darkness as vermin fed on them. While historians debate how often it happened, the tale itself endured, shaping the tower's reputation for terror. What unites all these accounts is the psychological terror. Rat torture was never just physical, it was mental. The victim's imagination magnified every sound, every scratch, every squeal. The horror lay not only in what happened, but in what could happen. Today, rat torture seems like something from nightmares. But its legacy runs deeper than we think. It reminds us how fear can be turned into a weapon, how even the lowliest animal can become part of a system of control. Archaeological digs confirm fragments of cages and burned pots near old prisons. Testimonies from different continents, centuries apart, describe the same method. Too many similarities for coincidence. Rat torture was real, and it teaches us something disturbing. Cruelty doesn't require advanced technology. It requires imagination. The executioners who used rats weren't geniuses. They were opportunists, exploiting the victim's deepest fears. That is why this method lasted so long. It didn't just break bodies, it broke hope. Even now, the story lingers in our culture. Films, books, and documentaries return again and again to the image of rats as instruments of horror. Because we understand instinctively, being devoured alive, slowly, is one of humanity's oldest fears. But history also shows resilience. Many victims resisted until the end, refusing to confess even under this torment. Their silence, their endurance, is a reminder that even the most horrific punishments cannot fully erase human courage. So the next time you see a rat scurry in the shadows, remember, in history's darkest dungeons, these creatures weren't just pests. They were executioners, and their scratching claws carried with them the weight of empires.